Afghanistan, a land of endless mountains and endless mysteries. A land where wars rage for centuries. Yet beneath the battles, something older lurks. Something hidden in the valleys, the caves, and the mountains. In 2002, during the height of the U.S. war in Afghanistan, an entire squad of American soldiers disappeared without a trace in a remote valley. No radio contact, no distress call, nothing. At first, the military believed it was just another ambush, another firefight lost in the dust and chaos of war. But when a special forces team went to investigate, they found something waiting for them. Not enemy fighters, not Taliban insurgents, something else. A giant, 12 feet tall, red hair, pale withered skin, and carrying a spear the size of a telephone pole. Officially, it never happened. Unofficially, soldiers still whisper about it to this day. It began with a routine patrol, a squad sent into the mountains near Kandahar, tasked with scouting caves rumored to hide Taliban fighters. But then came nothing but radio silence. Days passed and search parties were sent, but found only empty desert trails, until one special forces unit was deployed to trace their last known path. What they found was more than just silence. At the entrance of the cave, they found military equipment, gear that should have been in the hands of trained soldiers, scattered, shredded, and almost as it was dropped in panic. As they surveilled the area, they felt the ground shake. From the darkness of the cave, a figure stepped forward. At first, the operators thought it was a trick of the light. A man, maybe. No, something far larger. Over 12 feet tall, long, fiery red hair, pale skin, leathery and scarred by time. And in its hand, a weapon. Not a rifle, not a sword, but a spear so massive it could pierce through body armor in a single strike. The soldiers opened fire. Muzzle flashes lit up the mountainside. The echo of gunfire rolled through the valley, but the giant didn't fall. Squad members say it shrugged off the onslaught, charging forward with inhuman speed. One soldier was impaled by the spear, lifted off the ground and killed instantly. The team poured hundreds of rounds into the creature before it finally collapsed. Silence, smoke, and a body so massive, the team was left stunned. The body was so large it couldn't be moved by a truck. A helicopter was called in. Witnesses say the giant was strapped up, airlifted, and flown to an undisclosed base. After that, there was nothing but NDAs to be signed. No official reports, no mention in military logs. However, with any good secret, whispers were leaked. Soldiers who claimed they were there spoke in hushed tones, describing the same red-haired giant, the same cave, the same cover-up. Yet the U.S. government insists there are no records, no files, no evidence whatsoever that the Kandahar Giant ever existed. Officially, they say it never happened. But here's the question. If it was just a story, why does it match so many ancient legends? For centuries, the tribes of Afghanistan have told tales of giants. Massive beings that lived in the mountains, dwelling in caves, feeding on their livestock, and sometimes even humans. These legends describe beings with red hair and pale skin, immensely strong, nearly impossible to kill. Are those merely coincidence, or were those legends warnings? Some believe these creatures were Nephilim, biblical giants, described as the offspring of angels and humans. Others point to similar legends around the world, giants in Native American stories, Norse mythology, even Greek accounts of Cyclops and Titans. Every culture and every continent, the same story. Giants once walked the earth. So if they existed in the past, could one have survived, hidden away in the remote caves of Afghanistan? The Kandahar Giant remains one of the most chilling modern legends of war. If this story is true, why was it covered up, and what happened to the body? And how many more of these beings could still be hiding in the mountains, waiting to be discovered, or waiting to be disturbed? However, for the locals it wasn't a surprise, because long before foreign troops ever arrived, the people of Afghanistan already had a name for those beings. They knew the caves held something massive and something hungry. Locals claim the mountains of Kandahar have been whispering the truth for centuries. The story didn't reach the public until years later, when a supposed soldier from the operation spoke out on an alternative radio show. He claimed the giant was flown to the US base, where it disappeared. He also claimed the military pressured survivors into silence, threatening their careers if they ever spoke about what they saw. Other servicemen have anonymously confirmed pieces of the story: the missing patrol, the giant's red hair, the unusual airlift that followed. But with no official records, how can we know what really happened? Afghanistan is one of the most mountainous regions on Earth. The Hindu Kush mountain range cuts across the country like a jagged scar, its peak stretching nearly 25,000 feet into the sky. But it isn't just the surface that tells the story. Beneath these mountains lie another world. The Hindu Kush is filled with thousands of caves, some shallow, only a few feet deep, others stretching for miles, twisting underground like arteries through stone. For centuries, these caves have been hiding places. Bandits use them to escape justice, nomads to shelter from storms. During the wars with the British and the Soviets, rebels made them fortresses, and in 2001, the Taliban used them as strongholds against American forces. But long before guns and politics, these caves had another reputation. According to Afghan legend, the caves were home to something else: a race of giants. The Pashtun tribe told stories of massive beings, some twice the height of a man, humanoids, yes, but with a savage twist. They described creatures with hair of fire, long, wild, and red, skin as pale as bone, and tempers that could turn violent without warning. They were said to live deep in the mountains, in places where the air itself felt strange. Travelers spoke of torches that wouldn't stay lit, flames that sputtered out for no reason. They said the echo of their own footsteps would sound wrong, too many returns, as if something else were moving just behind you. And sometimes, people who ventured too deep never came back at all. To the locals, the idea of giants hiding in the caves wasn't shocking. It wasn't even new. For them, the stories were as old as the mountains themselves, passed down through generations. Warnings wrapped in folklore, So when word spread that the American soldiers had encountered something monstrous near Kandahar, the villagers weren't surprised at all. They told them it wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a myth. It was confirmation of what they had always believed. Long before the first soldiers set foot in Afghanistan, long before the modern wars, the people of these mountains already knew the stories. They spoke of the devas, giant beings that once roamed the earth. The devas were described in detail, generation after generation. All the stories consisted of the pale skin, fiery hair, and towering bodies. And worst of all, they were all said to be cannibals. These weren't bedtime stories. These were warnings. According to the Pashtun tribes, the devas weren't spirits or myths. They were predators. Parents warned their children, do not wander into the mountains. Not because of wolves, not because of bandits, not even because of the Taliban, but because of something older, something that had always lived there. The locals called them the men of the mountains. The men of the mountain were said to hunt after dusk. They favored caves, using the darkness as their weapon. Travelers who strayed too close sometimes never returned. Villagers spoke of livestock disappearing, only for bones to be found days later, gnawed and cleaned. Some even told of entire caravans vanishing in remote passes, their goods left scattered, but no bodies ever found. To the tribes, this has always been part of their reality. Even more, what makes these legends more unsettling is how familiar they sound. The red-haired, pale-skinned giants of Afghanistan mirror the stories of giants told across the world. In Native American tradition, the Sitka was cannibalistic red-haired giants said to roam Nevada. In the Bible, the Nephilim were described as mighty men of old, half human, half divine, who devoured the flesh of man. In the Norse sagas, they tell of the Jotnar, enormous, brutal mountain dwellers. Different continents, different cultures, all the same story again. Were these really just myths that grew out of human imagination? Or were they memories, echoes of a time where mankind really did walk beside giants? So when American soldiers in 2002 claimed to have faced a giant in Kandahar, the villagers didn't laugh, they didn't scoff, they just nodded and listened. Because for them it was nothing new. The Kandahar Giant wasn't a strange rumor. It was the same story that they have always feared. The same men of the mountains their ancestors have warned them about for centuries. And if the legends are true, the caves may hold more than just one. Because when US soldiers entered Afghanistan in the early 2000s, they weren't just stepping into a war zone. They were stepping into a land of legends. A place where ancient stories of man-eating giants were still told in hushed voices. Special Forces troops have quietly admitted that they were warned by locals. They were told to not go into the valley or the caves because something lived there. At first, the soldiers thought it was superstition, old world fear, mountain folklore. They were wrong. Patrols began to vanish. Teams that ventured into the mountains sometimes never returned. When the search parties went looking, they did find traces, but they never found bodies. Some soldiers describe hearing guttural growls echoing from cave mouths. Others claim to have seen massive silhouettes in the rocks at dusk, shapes too large, too broad to be human. At night, strange sounds carry across the valleys, like stones being hurled, striking cliffs near campsites. Soldiers claim that it wasn't the Taliban, but something else watching them. And then there were the remains. Not the remains of enemy fighters killed in battle. Those were all too familiar. These were different. Bodies found torn apart, crushed as if by enormous hands, bones shattered with unnatural force. Even hardened soldiers admitted the scenes were unlike anything they've ever witnessed in combat. Too violent, too brutal, too monstrous. The whispers spread quickly through the ranks. Stories of giants in the mountains, creatures that hunted from caves. The men of the mountain. For the troops on the ground, these were no longer legends. They were warnings that suddenly seemed all too real. Special Forces operators would later admit, off the record of course, that they avoided certain valleys entirely. They knew the reputations. They'd been told the stories, and they weren't eager to become part of them. So by the time one Special Forces unit was sent to investigate the missing patrol in Kandahar, the warnings were already there. The stories were already known. But no one was prepared for what they were about to face. What makes the Kandahar story so chilling is how well it fits the local traditions. For generations, Afghan tribes have told the stories of enormous beings lurking in the mountains. The details are precise, details that echo eerily through the accounts given by the modern soldiers. Local legends say the giant's hair glows in the sun like fire, a distinct feature rare among the dark-haired people of the region, but repeated in story after story. And what did the soldiers report in 2002? A massive being, more than 12 feet tall, with long red hair streaming down its shoulders. Coincidence? Or confirmation? Then there are the caves, always described as the giant's lairs, places of darkness where few dared to go. The men of the mountain were said to wait in these caves for travelers, ambushing them in the shadows. The Kandahar Giant was discovered in the mouth of a cave, with the missing soldiers' gear scattered outside, exactly where the legend said it would be. Then there's the giant spear. Pashtun folklore describes the giants as wielding weapons carved from entire tree trunks. Spears so large, they could cut down a horse or a man in one strike. According to witness accounts, the Kandahar Giant carried just such a weapon. A crude but deadly spear. One strike killed a man instantly. Yet another detail preserved through centuries of oral tradition. Even the way the creature died lines up with the legends. Soldiers reported it took hundreds of rounds to bring it down. Magazines were emptied and weapons were overheated before the giant finally collapsed. And the folklore? It says giants could not be killed by ordinary means. Only a strike to the heart or the severing of the head could kill them. Two stories separated by centuries, yet describing the same creature, the same battle, the same end. The soldiers weren't just describing something new. They were repeating stories that had been told for generations, not just in Afghanistan, but across the world. The red-haired cannibals of Nevada, the Nephilim of the Bible, the Jotnar of the Norse mythology. Every culture, every continent, the same story over and over and over. And if the Kandahar Giant is real, it isn't an isolated case. It's part of a pattern. Ask the villagers of Afghanistan about giants, and you'll hear stories that sound almost too strange to believe. But to the people who live in the shadow of the Hindu Kush, these stories aren't entertainment. They are warnings, passed down from elder to child, carved into memory as surely as the mountains themselves. In Kandahar province, shepherds tell of entire flocks that vanished overnight near cave entrances, with no sound and no struggle. The next morning, the animals were just gone. The only evidence were drag marks in the dirt leading towards the darkness of the caves. Some locals say it was just wolves or the bandits, but most say it was the men of the mountain, because giants hunt under cover of night. In Nuristan, hunters claim they have found footprints 3 times the size of a man's. Each print pressed deep into the earth, as if by a weight no human could carry. They followed the trail into the mountains, until that trail ended at the mouth of a cave. The hunters did not go inside. They left their catch behind and returned home before nightfall. The prints, they said, did not belong to men. In Helmand province, a family swears that they saw a giant watching them from a ridge at twilight. The figure stood motionless, silhouetted against the fading sun. It was too tall and too broad to be a man. As the family was frozen in fear, the figure turned and vanished into the rocks as if it had never been there. But the memory stayed with them, a silent warning etched in their minds. To the west, these accounts sound like fairy tales. Tall tales spun from fear, myth, and imagination. But to the locals, they are not stories. They're cautions. Don't wander too far, don't linger near the caves, and don't assume that the mountains are empty. For the people of Afghanistan, giants aren't legends. They're neighbors, yet dangerous ones. Of course, not everybody believes. To skeptics, the Kandahar Giant is nothing more than modern myth. A mashup of soldier storytelling, internet exaggeration, and the timeless human love of campfire legends. They argue that there are no photographs, no official remains, and no paperwork in any archives, only stories. Skeptics also argue that soldiers under stress often see shapes in the dark. A shadow looks taller, a roar echoes louder, and when one person swears they saw something extraordinary, others may convince themselves they saw it too. They also argue that the Kandahar Giant fits neatly into the pattern of creepypastas, strange tales that spread across the internet in the early 2000s. Spooky, viral, but not necessarily real. And yet, why do these modern stories match ancient accounts so perfectly? Why do Pashtun legends describe the giants as pale-skinned, red-haired, living in caves, centuries before a single U.S. soldier ever set foot there? Why do villagers still warn travelers of the men of the mountain, with the same details soldiers spoke of years later? Was it coincidence or connection? Even stranger, why do whistleblowers risk their reputations, their careers, even their safety to talk about it? They gain no money and no fame. They're often only ridiculed, and yet they insist they saw it and that it happened. Sometimes silence itself is the loudest evidence. So what was the Kandahar Giant? A story invented by soldiers born from fear in a hostile land? A legend kept alive by frightened villagers, echoing through the centuries? Or a real creature, one that has been hiding in caves of Afghanistan for longer than history remembers? The military says it never happened. The villagers say otherwise. And the mountains, they keep their secrets well. For some, the Kandahar Giant is nothing more than a story, a tale soldiers told to pass the time, a legend magnified by the internet, a shadow mistaken for something larger than life. But for others, it's a truth hiding in plain sight. a warning written into local legend. A creature so dangerous, so real, that its very existence had to be buried. And so we're left with the questions. Why do the stories of soldiers mirror the myths of villagers? Why do the whispers never go away? And why, after all these years, does the military still insist it never happened? Maybe it was just a story. Maybe it was something more. But until the truth finally does come out, the Kandahar Giant remains one of history's mysteries.